He told his secretary I was boring. Not cruelly, just casually, like an afterthought meant to dissolve in the hum of fluorescent light. But it didn't. It settled in my ribs and burned quiet holes through my reflection. For years, I dimmed myself to fit the room. My clothes, my laugh, even the way I spoke trimmed into polite silence. That day, I realized invisibility was just obedience wearing perfume. I went home, poured the last of my savings into a camera, and filmed everything I'd been told to hide. One video, one heartbeat. And suddenly, every version of too much became exactly what the world had been waiting to see. Now, when he glances at a magazine, he's met with my face and the echo of the word that built me. Boring. The next morning, the office glass became mirrors. Every surface reflected her. The woman I'd dismissed, now unignorable. His words returned to him through headlines, looping like karma with perfect diction. She didn't need to confront him. Her silence had grown teeth. And somewhere between his pride and her rise, he realized the worst revenge was never fury. It was being forgotten by someone who became unforgettable. The internet spoke in ways boardrooms never could. Thousands of strangers found her story and built her name into a banner of defiance. She scrolled through comments, some cruel, some kind, but each one louder than the silence she'd lived in. The camera had turned her pain into currency, her honesty into revolution. Then came the call. A brand wanted her story. They didn't just want her image, they wanted her voice. She almost laughed, thinking of all the times she'd been told to speak less. The irony was delicious. She didn't hesitate this time. Yes, she said, and the world seemed to tilt in her favor. She never said his name in interviews, never told the story as revenge. She told it as truth. Sometimes, she said, people mistake quiet for boring, but quiet isn't empty. It's the sound before the music starts. The audience went still. For the first time, she wasn't explaining herself. She was simply being heard. The world didn't just notice her, it devoured her. Every platform, every feed, every whisper carried her name like a spark on dry wind. What began as defiance turned into a phenomenon. She spoke truth without bitterness, pain without pity, and people called it bravery. She knew better. It was survival, wearing a prettier name. Still, every repost felt like a heartbeat she'd reclaim. Somewhere, the man who called her boring watched from behind his polished desk, realizing the fire had sparked, now lit up cities. Fame felt like wearing someone else's skin at first. Every camera flashed a question, "Who are you now?" But she learned quickly. She curated her image with intention. Every color, every caption, every breath. She built a version of herself that couldn't be dismissed again. People loved her not because she was flawless, but because she was unapologetically visible. For the first time, she looked in the mirror and saw someone she wanted to know. The first primetime interview came faster than she expected. Cameras, cue cards, polished smiles, all waiting to define her story for her. But when the host asked, "What changed?" she didn't deliver a headline. She spoke about small humiliations, quiet anger, and the way being invisible can feel like death in slow motion. The audience fell silent. Somewhere in that silence, she felt the power shift. The story wasn't about him anymore. It was about everyone who'd ever been made to feel like less. The secretary found her again, this time not at a desk, but in a crowd. She waited in line at a book signing, clutching a copy of The Art of Being Unapologetic. When it was her turn, she whispered, "You made me quit." The woman smiled softly. "Good," she said. "Now, go make something that scares you." Two women who once shared silence now shared revolution. Months later, her face filled the skyline. Every street corner, every digital screen. But she didn't feel famous. She felt free. She'd learned that revenge was never about proving someone wrong. It was about becoming someone undeniable. As the city lights reflected her name, she thought of that quiet office, that careless word, and smiled. The story had never been about him. It was about the moment she stopped believing she had to earn her own light. Fame didn't arrive like thunder. It seeped into the seams of her day, until silence became the rarest thing she owned. Sleep thinned to a rumor. She learned the weight of a million eyes, how they made her stand taller and breathe shallower. Metrics blinked like a hospital monitor, and every dip felt like a failing organ. People called it momentum. She called it motion sickness. She missed the permission of anonymity, the smallness that let grief be private. Now grief had an audience, and triumph demanded a caption. She kept telling herself that purpose just costs more at scale, that every story is a currency, and she was finally solvent. But late at night, with the phone warm in her palm, she wondered what she'd traded away to be seen from every angle, except the one that felt like home. The meetings multiplied. Strategy decks, talking points, guardrails disguised as kindness. Protect the brand, someone said, as if it were a living thing that might bruise. They wanted her edges, just not the ones that cut. Tell the story of triumph, they urged, but leave out the pettier aches. The friend who stopped calling, the stranger who knew her address, the way hunger returned in rooms full of canapes. She learned to smile with her mouth and bargain with her eyes. She refused a campaign that dressed her pain in pastel. They shrugged, then circled back with a friendlier font. She realized the world will buy your truth at retail, then return it for store credit if it fits too honestly. She signed fewer papers. She wrote more margins. The cuts still stung, small, invisible. And that's what made them dangerous. On set, they called it enhancement. She watched her face climb through software, pores, softened jaw. Light poured into places life had dimmed. The photos were stunning and barely hers. She asked to keep the small scar near her lip, a reminder of a winter that taught her resilience has teeth. A hush moved through the room, then a nod, then a quiet recalibration of lighting and expectation. She felt a strange tenderness for her own reflection, not for its symmetry, but for its history. If becoming meant sanding away the story, she would rather be rough. The camera clicked. She held still, not as a mannequin, but as a witness. Later, the proofs showed a woman who looked like herself after choosing herself, and for the first time in weeks, the noise receded to something she could hum along with. She took a car to the old neighborhood without telling anyone. The kitchen smelled like cardamom and something steady. Her mother didn't ask for selfies. She asked if she'd eaten. They spoke about small things. The upstairs leak, the neighbor's new baby. Until smallness did what it always does, made room for truth. "You look tired," her mother said, gentler than any headline. She admitted that success had hands, some that lifted, some that gripped. They laughed at a memory of second-hand dresses and grocery coupons, and the laughter washed the polish off her week. Before leaving, she touched the dent in the table where she once wrote essays, a map of who she'd been. It felt like coordinates she could still return to, proof that a life could be larger without losing its center. When the panic came, it didn't shout. It pressed. Shoulders, throat, edges of sight. She found a rooftop because roofs are where cities teach you scale. Wine tugged at the day until only the necessary remained. She counted her breaths the way she once counted views. Slower this time. Kinder. The choice arrived as quietly as the panic had. To trade performance for presence, at least tonight. She opened her phone not to post but to write. A private manifesto about the metrics that would never measure her. How many times she chose rest over relevance, boundaries over applause. Tomorrow she'd share it maybe, or maybe she wouldn't. Power, she realized, was also the ability to keep something. The skyline glittered like a question she finally knew how to answer. The turn wasn't a cliff. It was a bend in the road, that everyone pretended they didn't see coming. One clipped sentence from a long interview, yanked out, sharpened, fed to the hunger machines. Overnight, the applause thinned into teeth. Headlines asked if she'd been calculated all along. If the story of survival was just another product launch. She didn't defend herself at first. She'd learned that truth is a slow walker and storms wear sprinting shoes. But the numbers returned to their hospital monitor rhythm, each dip a fresh diagnosis. She scrolled until the words blurred and the vowels turned to sirens, until even praise sounded like a dare. Somewhere, the man who labeled her boring watched the tide and mistook it for proof. She knew better. Weather changes, so do coastlines. She closed the apps and let the room be loud with her silence. The envelope arrived with the weight of a gavel. Legal language, brisk and arid, accusing her of defamation, of breaking an NDA she'd once signed in a smaller life with smaller dreams. The past clawed at the present through clauses and subclauses, each comma a tripwire. Her lawyer spoke like a metronome. We fight, we counter. She remembered the beige office, the coffee's 3 taps, the word that became her fuel. If the lawsuit was meant to scare her back into shrink-wrapped obedience, it miscalculated. Fear was a familiar hallway. She could walk it with her eyes closed now, but she also knew battles consume oxygen. She listed what she would not trade: sleep, mercy, the scars she kept in photos. Then she signed a retainer and felt the room tilt toward a sturdier gravity. The leak didn't come from an enemy. It arrived wrapped in apology from someone who once shared her first cheap victories. An old voice note, raw, unedited, spilled on a midnight call, surfaced online, trimmed to paint her ambition as cruelty. The friend said it was an accident, a sync gone wrong, a link sent to the wrong chat, maybe. Or maybe success stretches bridges until every footstep sounds like cracking. She mourned the friendship more than the fallout. Fame is a revolving door, but home should not spin. She wrote a message she didn't send. I was grateful before I was visible. Then she turned the lock on her own heart, a notch tighter, promising not to let caution become a cage. Trust, she decided, would stay, but it would carry a passport now. Contracts that once arrived like confetti began to dissolve midair. Pausing the collaboration, they said, the politest form of retreat. The calendar emptied into a white expanse that felt like snowfall after sirens. She could hear her own breath again, which was both blessing and verdict. The team shrank to the ones who believed without invoices attached, people who still texted good morning before strategy. She cleaned the apartment until the floors said her name back in a whisper. Somewhere in the quiet, a small idea knocked. Not a rescue, a return. The kind of work that doesn't need applause to stand. She opened the laptop and wrote for the invisible room. Letters to the person she'd been. Maps for those still walking in the dark. The blank days began to look like pages. When she finally spoke, it wasn't a press conference. It was a live stream with the comments turned off and the truth turned up. 30 minutes of calm chronology, receipts shown without venom, context restored like oxygen in a thin room. She didn't name call. She named dates. She didn't plead. She presented. And in the space after her last sentence, no music, no sponsor, no theatrics, something steadier than applause arrived. Not a surge, but a settling. The lawsuit would run its course. The weather would keep changing. But she had re-entered her own story as the narrator, not the subject. She ended with a promise to make work that could live without her face attached. Then she closed the laptop, felt the apartment exhale, and finally slept. She stopped chasing arenas and started choosing rooms that could hear themselves think. Community centers, libraries, basements with humming fridges, places where applause felt less like thunder and more like weather you could predict. She called them quiet sessions, hour-long circles where stories arrived with their shoes still on. No cameras, no merch table, just notebooks, and the soft grit of pencils, insisting on truth. She spoke about boredom as a costume, about the day she took it off, about how victory without tenderness curdles into parody. People came bruised and left blueprinting. Promises scribbled in margins, phone alarms set for morning courage. She realized she wasn't rebuilding a brand. She was building a practice. Not a comeback, a continuation. The kind that could survive headlines, pauses, even her own fear. In the smallest room, the future learned her name quietly and kept it. They turned the motto into a workshop. She asked the former secretary to co-lead, because revolution tastes better when shared. They taught 10 strangers how to trap lightning without burning their hands. Boundaries first, then story. Receipts, then rhetoric. Rest as non-negotiable. They practiced saying no until the words sounded like shelter. Between exercises, laughter kept arriving uninvited and perfectly on time. She watched people shift posture when their sentences found backbone, watched a room recalibrate itself around a chorus of unsoftened truths. For the first time since the fire began, she felt heat that warmed without consuming. They ended with a vow: make the next thing too honest to package. Walking out into evening air, she understood that impact wasn't the billboard on the block. It was the porch light left on for whoever came next. The law moved like winter. Slow, unavoidable, indifferent to anyone's calendar. On deposition day, she braided her hair with patience and packed nothing sharp except facts. Opposing counsel tried to turn her life into a crossword where the answer was always motive. She offered dates, emails, the shape of a silence that lasted years. Her attorney's nod met her sentences like handshakes. When they asked if she regretted going public, she thought of the basement circles, the doorways widened by a single honest story. "I regret staying quiet as long as I did," she said, steady as a metronome. Somewhere, the old word, boring, fluttered and died in the fluorescent light. Leaving the building, she noticed the sky changing color without asking permission. Weather, she realized, is not proof, it's context. And she was learning to forecast. She agreed to one interview. Long form? No edits, no makeup artist. The host asked for chronology, and she delivered cartography. The streets she walked alone, the days when achievement tasted like aluminum, the night she wrote her private manifesto and didn't share it. They spoke about fame as a loud room with bad acoustics, about boredom as obedience, about the way forgiveness is less a door than a window you learn to open from both sides. She didn't mention the former boss by name. She mentioned the system that needs people like him to stay comfortable. The host leaned back, questions spent, and let silence do what producers rarely allow: teach. When it ended, she felt lighter, not because she had defended herself, but because she had defined herself. The episode would air later. The relief was immediate. The email became a building. Grants approved, leases signed. A low brick space with good bones and bad paint transformed into a residency for first-time storytellers. She named it The Room Before. A place to be fully formed before the world arrives with labels. Opening day felt like a heartbeat she could keep. No step and repeat. Just neighbors and mismatched chairs. A bulletin board already messy with possibility. Her mother cut a ribbon with kitchen scissors and cried exactly once. She took a breath and understood that survival had grown into stewardship. The magazines still used her face when it suited them, but that felt like weather again. Useful to note, unworthy of worship. The doorbell rang, and a line formed. Not for autographs, but for keys. She smiled. She had become the headlines she always wanted to read. The first real change arrived as a tone, not a headline. A voicemail from her attorney in that careful cadence professionals use when victory and caution share a seatbelt. Mediation, he said. An offer that didn't admit fault, but felt like an apology learning to walk. Q. She paced the hall of the room before, palm on the fresh paint, remembering the paper cuts, the panic roofs, the small rooms that stitched her back together. The proposal was money and silence in equal measure, signatures like sand poured over footprints. She thought about how closure often comes disguised as quiet. She wanted more than a receipt. She wanted a correction not for him, but for every person who learned to shrink to keep a job. She called the attorney back, voice steady. "We won't buy peace," she said. "We'll build it on the record." The day felt taller around her. The courtroom smelled like paper and winter coats. She sat with her attorney and counted the breaths between gavels and objections, practicing the kind of stillness that doesn't surrender. Opposing counsel spoke in polished paragraphs. Her lawyer answered with dates that fit together, like vertebrae. Then came the email, an exhibit from a season she'd already forgiven, where the word boring lounged in a thread like a joke that aged badly. The room went quiet, the way a lake freezes, from the edges inward. She didn't look at him. She looked at the stenographer's hands translating everything into lines that would outlive memory. The judge asked for civility and got truth instead. She realized this wasn't revenge. It was weather clearing, visibility restored after fog. When the recess came, she stepped into the hallway and inhaled air that finally felt like hers. By afternoon, the offer returned, revised and human, a donation to the room before for 5 years. A public statement acknowledging her contributions at the company, retracting the diminishment without rehearsed remorse. No NDA this time. Only mutual non-disparagement written like a ceasefire after a season of weather. It was not perfection. It was precedent. She thought of the people in basements with humming fridges, telling the truth with their shoes still on. If she signed, she wanted the door they were building to swing both ways. She asked for one line more. A clause requiring annual mentorship hours from the company to first-time storytellers. Her attorney raised an eyebrow and then a smile. They said, yes. It felt less like winning and more like planting a guardrail where a cliff used to be. She dialed the friend who once leaked a midnight voice note and let the ring carry their history. When the line opened, neither of them tried for pretty. Apologies came unpolished, tripping over the furniture of pride. They spoke about scarcity and algorithms and the kind of hunger that turns people into headlines. The friend admitted to confusing proximity with access. She admitted to confusing boundaries with walls. They did not design a reunion. They designed a truce, the sort that trusts time to do the sanding. Before hanging up, the friend said, "I kept the first draft you ever sent me." She smiled into the quiet. The past didn't feel like a trapdoor anymore. It felt like a staircase she could ascend without fear of splinters. The statement went live the following week. Plain font, no fireworks. The magazines used her face again, but the temperature had changed. She marked the win with ordinary things. Sweeping the residency floor, labeling library bins, buying too many oranges for the communal bowl. That night, she hosted a reading where no one asked for selfies. They asked for pens. She closed with a story she'd never posted, about the afternoon she almost believed the word that tried to name her. The room breathed with her. When the applause softened to a hush, she understood the shape of her life now. Not a spotlight, but a constellation. Points of light connected by work, by rest, by people who'd learned the difference between attention and care. Outside, the city weathered on. Inside, a beginning held. The letter arrived without ceremony. No crest, no watermark, just sentences that stood up straight on ordinary paper. It said what she'd stopped expecting institutions to learn. Acknowledgement without performance, accountability without the choreography of shame. She read it once for content, again for temperature, and a third time for the quiet places where defensiveness usually hides. There weren't many, Relief came like rain on a metal roof, loud at first, then settling into rhythm. She felt no urge to frame it. She slid it into a folder marked ongoing because closure, she'd learned, is a verb. Outside, traffic braided itself into evening. She brewed tea, answered 2 mentees, and scheduled a maintenance check for the lights. The work hummed around her, a machine tuned to dignity. The letter was not a finished line. It was an instrument, finally playing the right key. She kept a bowl of keys by the door. Spares for rooms that didn't exist a year ago. One for the podcast studio with carpet that forgave mistakes. One for the lending library that smelled like dust and beginning. One for the quiet room with no Wi-Fi where panic discovered it could pass. She turned each over in her palm like small, dull medals from a war she chose not to re-enlist in. Visitors arrived all day with stories in cardboard boxes. Drafts, playlists, the first brave sketches of a future they were still learning to want out loud. She listened, like a profession. When someone asked how to stay, not just arrive, she answered without decorating the truth. Community, boundaries, rest, repeated until boredom mistakes you for permanence. Laughter shook the ceiling. She laughed too, surprised by how light survival can feel when it stops performing. She saw him on the far curb before he saw her. City noise folded around the moment, indifferent and oddly protective. He looked smaller than the version the headlines kept handy, not because he'd diminished, but because she no longer needed him to be large. They met in the middle of the crosswalk, and time practiced its favorite trick, stretching thin. No speeches, no cameras. He said hello like a person, not a chapter. She returned it. He offered a sentence that could live in daylight, regret without theater. She offered one back. Distance without ice. The light changed. They moved. She didn't look over her shoulder to confirm transformation. Change, she knew, is what remains when recollection gets bored. Halfway down the block, she laughed at nothing specific. A sound elastic with mercy. The city kept going. So did she. They called the final night of the first cohort the room after. A reading with no program, where pieces chose their own order by daring to be finished. She watched the mentees arrive in armor made of paper. Stapled chapbooks, zines, scripts held together by bulldog clips and breath. The air was ceremonial but stubbornly human. Someone spilled tea and cleaned it without apology. When it was her turn, she read something new and unremarkable in the best way, craft without confession. The kind of work that owes nothing to spectacle. The applause felt like a tide that knew the shoreline. In its hush, she sensed the ordinary future she'd been angling toward. Mornings with emails and mop buckets, afternoons with sentences, evenings where the loudest thing in the room was a pen insisting on one more line. Satisfaction landed like a bird and stayed. Dawn leaned through the windows in a color the city reserves for people up early on purpose. She unlocked the door, swept confetti that was actually paper moons from someone's poem, watered plants that believed in continuity, and taped a new sign to the wall. Make something that keeps you company when no one's looking. The mag covers would cycle on without her. Weather, not witness. She brewed coffee for the first arrivals and sat with the quiet, letting it register as wealth. When the bell rang, she answered without drafting a persona. The young woman on the step had a manuscript and a tremor. "I heard you help boring people," she said, half joking. "Only the brave ones," she answered. Stepping aside, the day entered, so did the future, loyal as light. Somewhere inside it, she took off her armor and stayed.